Hello, my name is Dylan San Jose, and the animal behavior that I will be talking about is altruism. Altruism in biology describes behavior which is done by an individual which benefits others, but it's usually at their own detriment. This usually happens with animals with more developed social structures. For example, meerkats, when they're foraging, there's usually a single meerkat stationed as a watcher, looking out for possible predators and or other threats. When it sees a threat, it starts barking, which alerts others, allowing them to get to safety. But in the process, it draws attention to itself, which decreases its chance of surviving. Honeybees demonstrate altruism as they spend their life laboring for the queen bee, and they protect the hive by stinging intruders, which kills themselves. Wolves also can show altruism by bringing back kills to others who didn't participate in the hunt. Why altruism? Because altruism may seem a bit counterintuitive for animals, seeing as it decreases their own fitness. There are several explanations for the evolution of the selfless behavior. One of them is inclusive behavior, which is a metric used to describe an organism's evolutionary success, which takes into account not only its ability to pass on its own genes, but its ability to help its close relatives pass on their similar genes. This helps to explain why some animals raise their young and other altruistic behavior. Altruism can also occur between individuals which aren't related, which is seen by reciprocal altruism, which is described as pretty much the exchange of selfless behavior in the same vein as like, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. It's done by animals with more stable social groups. Individuals have to meet frequently for there to be like a back and forth of these exchanges. There also had to be consequences imposed on cheaters, those who don't reciprocate when they are solicited for the same altruistic behavior. Otherwise, they would just be taken advantage of. Several organisms which practice reciprocal altruism use a tit-for-tat strategy in which they respond to altruism in kind, but if they are cheated by this recipient, they retaliate and they don't cooperate until the cheater, returns the favor. So going back to inclusive fitness, a method that is used in order to predict the effectiveness of altruism is Hamilton's hypothesis. It considers three different variables: R, which is the coefficient of relatedness, the average number of or B, which is the average number of offspring that would result from the altruistic act, and C, which is the cost, which is measured also in the number of offspring. If you turn all those into numbers, Hamilton's rule states that if R times B is greater than C, natural selection would favor the altruistic act. So to explain a little bit more, the coefficient of relatedness is the fraction of genes that are shared between the altruist and the recipient of the act. So for example, siblings are 50%, parents the same, and the same goes for parent and child, So every time you go up a generation or you look at siblings, it's going to be multiplied by 50%. So from nephew to uncle, if you want to go from nephew to uncle, it would be 50% for the child to parent, then multiplied by another 50 for the brother of the father, which is the uncle. So it'd be 0.25. For the cousin, you multiply by another 0.5, which would get you a 0.125 coefficient of relatedness. An example where Hamilton's rule can be applied is the scenario. Your cousin needs a kidney, you two are matched, you plan to donate a kidney, and assuming that you and your cousin will have an average of 2 children and the probability of you having kidney-related issues in the future is 50%. So in this situation, the coefficient between you and your cousin is 0.125, as we calculated before, 0.5 for your parents, 0.5 again for your uncle, 0.5 again for your uncle's son, your cousin. And so, since your cousin and you probably we'll have an average of 2 children, I mean, separately, if he survives. B, which is the number of resulting children that would result from this altruistic act, would be 2. And to calculate C, you know that there's a 50% chance of you having kidney related problems, so we'll just say that you die in that scenario. So 2, the number of children that you would have on average, times 0.5, which is the chance of you having those kids, is 1. So yeah, if you do all the math, it comes out that R times B equals 0.25, which is less than 1, so natural selection would not favor this altruistic action. Looking at Hamilton's rule, we see that natural selection favors altruism the more closely the recipient is to the altruist. This is coming back to the factor behind kin selection, in which natural selection favoring altruism by increasing the reproductive success of a relative. If we were to go back to the scenario before and say replace your cousin with your sibling, natural selection would end up varying that decision, as they share more of the same genes. So yeah, I'll be going more into depth about the altruism demonstrated in vampire bats. This wall of text is pretty much all the classification with the clades, all the clades and subgroups I can find. So I'll just be going through them all right now. Domain eukarya, meaning that its cells have nucleus and organelles, a membrane nucleus and organelles. Supergroup Uniconta, clade of Pistoconta, clade on kingdom Anomalia, clade Metazoa, similar for all other animals. Eumetazoa for tissues, bilateria, meaning it has bilateral symmetry. Deuterostomia, meaning that its anus forms before its mouth during embryonic development. Craniata, meaning it has a skull, vertebrata, a backbone. Gnastostomata, meaning that it has a jaw. Euteleostomi, meaning it's a bony vertebrate. Sarcopterigi, meaning it evolved from lobed fin fishes. Tetrapoda, meaning four-limbed. Amniotic, meaning it has an amniotic sac. Synapsida, meaning that it has a pair of openings on the side of its temples. Mammalia, meaning it nurses their young with milk. Theria, meaning that they give birth to live young and not in eggs like a platypus. Eutheria, meaning that they have placenta. Chiroptera, meaning the bats. And Phylostomidae, meaning leaf-nosed bats. And Desmodontinae, meaning vampire bats. Oops. Vampire bats, as you know, feed on the blood of animals. However, they die after 48 to 72 hours of not eating due to starvation. 8% of vampire bat adults fail each night. Because of this, it is common for vampire bites, which successfully forage to regurgitate their blood, to share with unsuccessful vampire bats. This only happens, as said before, if there are frequent and intermittent interactions between individuals, and if they are able to recognize other individuals so they don't get cheated. This reciprocal altruism is mostly seen between females and occasionally male and females. Male-male altruism isn't seen as, for a number of factors, which are mostly due to the social structure of vampire bats. They're polygynous, meaning that the males mate with multiple females. Males also defend their mating territory from other males, often to the death. So males aren't each other as round as they do, and if they are in contact, it's more conducive to aggressive behavior than it is to altruism. A couple of behavioral studies were done on the reciprocal altruism of captive bats to observe their altruistic behavior. It took place over the span of 7 months, sometimes soliciting by sharing them putting them in closer proximity. The experimental group was made up of 2 male and 4 female vampire bats. Each of them, each of different maternal lines to ensure that relatedness didn't play a part in their experiment. They found that interactions between the socially acclimated vampire bats were more frequent than reported out in the wild and much less aggressive. It also found that aggressive interactions also happened more between male and female partners rather than the male partners. A drawback is, though, that there were very few bats in this study and there weren't that many interactions being recorded. There's a bit of speculation on why vampire bats demonstrate blood regurgitation with other individuals that aren't related to them. There are a couple explanations proposed for this, such as harassment from vampire bats who have been eating towards bats with a successful forage. Another explanation is that bats fail to recognize that they aren't related as they rely on their smell to identify each other. So yeah, they might just get confused. A study shows how donors of food sharing are often more often initiate the sharing of blood more often than recipients, which contradicts the hypothesis that they harass the blood donors. It's also found that food sharing more accurately predicted them being like having passed sharing in the past rather than relatedness. The food sharing network is also consistent with the grooming that is done between these bats. So if they groom each other, it is more likely that they're going to be sharing food with each other. Another study supported the results, saying that both relatedness and prior association both predicted whether or not bats shared their blood. It also tested whether or not bats would help each other if other bats came to them starved, and they found that the sharing of blood essentially always happens between the same partners and almost never with strangers. It was also found that grooming was almost always a prerequisite for the sharing, as hungry bats often groomed with potential donors. This happens more with bats who are more closely related than strangers. In order to make sure that bats don't get cheated, they also use vocalizations to identify partners as well as cheaters, or bats who didn't share after being solicited to share blood. So yeah. Yeah, that were all the wrong one. These are my sources.